Good evening, everyone. Looking forward to class this week. Got some topics this week and next week that are especially relevant for people who are perhaps not married or maybe contemplating one day getting married or looking for a more serious, committed relationship. Got some content I think you're going to enjoy. I've enjoyed putting it together and kind of looking through some old documents and books and things that are good reads from the past. So I want to remind everyone that if you'd like to get a text message reminder, I usually send it out about 6:30, about half an hour before class starts. You go to this URL I've got listed here, rmd.at/KC midweek. And if you'll go to that address, you can sign up on your smartphone to get those notifications. And glad to have anyone who wants to stay in the loop do that, so you'll know when we're going to be doing class and going live, and hopefully helping everybody to remember. I know in the middle of the week it's easy to be busy and to get busy with something at the house and just kind of forget this is happening. So if it's helpful to you to get a reminder, we try to send those out every week. Class title for tonight: Look Before You Leap. Look before you leap. We are talking about relationships, but we're talking especially about if you're not yet in one, or maybe you've done a little dating and you're thinking about getting more serious with one. We're going to be doing this week and next week. This week I've got some stuff we'll be showing you, talking about like kind of the way to pace your relationship. Next week, we're going to be looking more at how do you analyze a person. Like if you're kind of maybe interested in someone and they're kind of maybe interested in you, just because there's interest there doesn't mean it's necessarily a great idea. So what are some tools, some things that we can look at and pay attention to that help us to get a good reading of this other person and whether that other person is a good fit for us? So that's next week. This week, we're going to be talking a little bit more about, again, how to kind of pace your relationship and a good progression for how things ought to move along. And even if you're a person who's already, many, many years into your marriage, whatever, all of us have kids, grandkids, nieces and nephews, friends. All of us know people in our life who are not yet married, who probably need some good encouragement. So I hope that this class will feel like a resource. And if you think it's useful, you're always more than welcome to hit that share button on Facebook and send it to somebody who you think would benefit from this content. All right, so here's a good quote. If you marry Jethro, you also get the Clampetts. Now, that's a really dated reference. I mean, even the modern Beverly Hillbillies movie was in, I think, the 90s, right? So I recognize that's a dated reference, but it is a pretty good reference. So you go after one family member, you discover that there's a lot more that goes with that person than just that person, right? We're not born and raised in isolation. In fact, there are many aspects to us individually. There are many aspects socially to us in our families, and it is worth paying attention to those dynamics and all that's involved with that. So just curious whether you are a long since married person or maybe you're someone who's just observed this. If you were to mention some of the unexpected things that you've learned come with a person, what would those be? I know for me, my first experience with that, I mean, you grow up in your family, so it's just the air that you breathe. And what you do as a family, even if it's not normal, seems normal to you because it's all you know. I remember, though, living in the dorm and suddenly having to share living spaces with people who did not grow up in my house, who over time you start to discover don't do everything the way that I thought things are supposed to be done. Maybe they're a lot cleaner than you. Maybe they're way dirtier than you. So there's a lot of dynamics in sharing a space with a person. That's only intensified when it is a romantic relationship with someone that you love, that you're married to. So I'm just kind of curious if you could list some unexpected things that you've kind of learned come with a person. What might those be? I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on that. What are some things that, as a single person, you just didn't even have on your radar that now you've learned, hey, that's worth paying attention to. You ought to be aware that that's a thing. So feel free to make some comments on that, share your thoughts on that. I did have this one section of scripture I wanted to reference, and conveniently, it's a guy named Jethro talking about Moses' father-in-law. There's two passages that especially highlight him. I just want you to watch the family dynamics going on in this passage and also the next passage that we're going to look at. Think about all the different things at play and what's going on here, and I'd like to have you comment and share what some of those are. It says in Exodus chapter 4 and verse 18, then Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, let me return to my own people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive. Jethro said, go, and I wish you well. Now the Lord had said to Moses in Midian, go back to Egypt, for all those who wanted to kill you are dead. So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and started back to Egypt, and he took the staff of God in his hand. So put yourself in those shoes, whether you see yourself as the Jethro figure or the Moses figure or his wife, I believe her name was Zipporah, from her perspective. It's easy for us to just read a Bible story and say, oh, okay, then Moses took his wife and kids and went back to Egypt. Well, wait a second. Last time he was in Egypt, there's like a warrant out for his arrest. He's like public enemy, right? Like they're going after him. And you're going to bring my daughter and my two grandsons and just go riding back on this donkey? The response from Jethro here is really telling of his faith. He does have the role of a priest. But think about that. Let that soak in a little bit. It's not so simple as Moses saying, well, now I got me a wife. Come on, wife, let's just, take off this way. Instead, he started by talking to his father-in-law and saying, hey, I've really got to go back to Egypt. God is telling me I need to go back to Egypt. And so we're going to do that. But you have to kind of put your faith in God on this circumstance, right? Because hopefully no one is still trying to kill Moses, or it could go very badly for all of them. So just think about that, the dynamics of them. I've got a couple of these comments coming in. Here's one. Randall says, how much money they like to spend and what they like to spend it on. I tell you, Randall, when I do premarital counseling with people, we definitely talk about finances and often have to sort through some of those kinds of details because, yes, we all have different expectations of what we consider a reasonable amount of money that we should be able to spend at will on whatever we want. And boy, you talk about conflict creation and escalation. That one adds up very quick. Yes, Sandy, this is a real thing too. Sleep habits. How late do you normally sleep in the morning? What time do you normally go to bed? It makes a difference if you're a morning person or a night owl. And if you're sharing a bed and sharing a living space, that can be it can be challenging to work that out. Not that you can't do it, but you may have to bump heads a few times and then really kind of talk about, okay, how are we gonna make this work? And how am I gonna make sure each of us gets enough sleep, enough revitalizing, still have some quality time together and all this? Yeah, there's a lot to sort through. Joy, this is a big one. This is a big one, and God bless you for all that you did for John over the years as his health was in decline. But this is true. The other person's health. When you marry a person and you say, until death do us part, for better or for worse, sometimes it is for worse. Sometimes our health, especially, when your health isn't intact, it's hard to do much else. You don't feel like going out. You can't do things. These days, you can't risk anything. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Joy. And that's exactly right. That, your partner's health, your spouse's health. I mean, it may be the case that you really had all these intentions for retirement or whatever it is you get to, and lo and behold, you get to retirement and their health doesn't permit you to do any of the stuff you thought you were going to do. That's kind of what happened to my great-grandparents. My great-grandfather died at 73 and took us all completely by surprise. Just a massive heart attack. And boy, we were just stunned because he had had a back surgery. He'd had a lot of pain over the years, and he was like standing taller, feeling better than he had felt in decades. And then all of a sudden, he was just out of the picture. And I know my great-grandmother, I heard her talk on several occasions of how sad she was because of some of the stuff they had hoped to do. And so that's right. You can't take anything for granted, and you just don't know, Joy. That's right. The person's health, may not always be there. It also, I think, is a good word of admonishment to do what you can to preserve your health and take care of yourselves, because you can be a better spouse when you're in such a condition that helps you to do that. So to the extent you can, that's an important thing to pay attention to. Yeah, good comments, everybody. So I wanted y'all to notice the family dynamics in that passage. I want to look at one other passage as well. This one's a bit longer. I'm going to read it for you. So Jethro has come to visit Moses and his family. It says, the next day Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people. So they're out of Egypt, and Moses is leader of the people. And it says they stood around him from morning till evening. Think about the current lines to get COVID vaccines, right? Just from morning to evening, never ending. It says, when his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, what is this you're doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge while all these people stand around you from morning to evening? Moses answered him, because the people come to me and seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions. Moses' father-in-law replied, what you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and instructions, and show them the way they are to live and how they are to behave. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter, because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. Now, I know not all of us have had the experience of unsolicited advice that was as good as this advice, right? But that's another thing that pops up when you're blending your lives together. You may get advice from each other or from another family member, but notice here the way that there's kind of an ownership of wanting to see Moses doing well, making sure he's not just completely exhausted all the time, making sure he has space in his life for rest, recreation, time with his family. Moses struggled with balance, just like all of us, struggled with wanting to do too much and bite off too much. One of the things that we have to do is to look out for each other. But again, I think that's kind of a nice portrait of the value of an older person reaching out to a younger person, but also a healthy relationship between, a father-in-law and a son-in-law. There's several things to me to pick apart in that passage, but just again, Moses and Zipporah get married. There's a whole lot more to that scenario than just the two of them. Right? There's a lot more to that. Just like there's a lot more to you and the person that you're married to or the person you're going to marry one day. There's a lot more to both of you than just you and that person. Brenda mentions, yes, the wisdom we've been talking about. Yes. Manette also mentions whether or not you and your spouse are morning people. Moses is a good example of the idea that wise people listen to advice. Very good. So we're tying this into our Proverbs class, everybody. Very good. That's Kevin on Sunday afternoons at 4. That's right. Yeah, Moses listened to advice. So from a wise person. And that says good things about Moses. Let's see. Family dynamics here. I've already kind of asked that question, but I'm just kind of curious what you see. And family was one of the bigger dynamics that shows up in that particular story. But I wanted to mention that when we talk about people, there is more to a person than just the person. So y'all have seen this before if you never miss a Sunday, right? Like this has showed up in one of my sermons before. I'm trying to remember which one that was, but there's several different aspects to a person. I'm borrowing this chart from a guy named Pete Scazzero in his book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. I found this really helpful. When it comes to you, sometimes we tend to overinflate one part of ourselves and not inflate enough another part of ourselves. So look at these different components of you as a person. Certainly, we all have a spiritual component. There is some part of you that's wrestling with the bigger questions of life and where things are moving and headed and all that kind of stuff. So you have a spiritual component that wonders if there's anything more in this world, and hopefully through knowing God, we nurture that. You definitely have a social component. I think that's inclusive of your family, but also your friends, the network of people you know through your occupation. We're social beings. No person is really meant to be an island. We all find meaning and purpose in our lives through the way that we connect to other people. So there's a social context. You have a physical self, your physical body. It makes a difference. If to Joy's point earlier, you don't exactly know what your health is going to be, but if you pay attention to your physical health, that can have good benefit to a lot of other aspects of your life. That has been the case for me, because by default, I'll tell you, I just don't enjoy exercising. Like, I don't mind playing a game, like a sport or something with people. But in terms of just hopping on a treadmill, like, it's just miserable. I hate every second of it. I have tried to do better about exercising more. It's always a struggle for me, but I have found it to be the case that anytime I've had some sort of a spiritual growth breakthrough in my life, it occurred while I was paying better attention to my physical body and working on my physical health as well. So those two are not separated. In fact, you're a whole person, and all these factors affect each other. There's your emotional well-being. It is okay to make a big deal of what you're feeling, and feelings make up part of who we are. Feelings are things that God gave us, and they can illuminate things. They can teach us things. They can sometimes help us have better intuition about the decisions we're making. Then we also have an intellectual side. All of us have some sorts of things about which we are curious and need to learn and need to grow, and we like to kind of engage in rigorous thinking and planning, or whatever it is that drives you. But if you think about yourself, all of these are components that are pretty significant. So I think it's a true point to say there is more to a person than just the person. And what does it mean to be a person? Well, it has to mean at least those 5 things. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to be drawing tonight pretty heavily from this book by John Van Epp. I thought maybe there would be an updated edition of this book. I don't think there is. I was looking online a couple of days ago, and so there may be a newer edition somewhere, but kind of a funny title: How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk, the foolproof way to follow your heart without losing your mind. And I found this book to be really helpful, and some of these ideas are very useful, especially if you are trying to do exactly that. How do I pick the person I want to spend my life with and not make a really bad choice? I hate to put it in those terms, but it is something that you want to think through, right? There's not any decision that will affect you as much as the person you decide to marry. I mean, it impacts absolutely every other aspect of your life. So this week and next week, I'm going to be borrowing pretty heavily from the materials in that book. I liked his summary of, like, if you could just say, concisely, what is a jerk? So these are jerk traits. Jerks are people who regularly break boundaries. So whatever healthy boundaries are, whatever space is supposed to be yours, whatever things you've agreed on, jerks don't care. Jerks just kind of run over those boundaries whenever they feel like it. They disrespect you, they disregard your feelings, they belittle you for making an issue, but jerks just regularly break boundaries. Secondly, jerks do not consider other people's perspectives. Someone who's a jerk is usually pretty self-centered, and all that matters is their perspective. They don't need to hear your side. They're not interested in being empathetic. So there's a good point. Number 3, jerks have a lack of emotional controls and balance. Now, they'll be highly critical of you if you kind of get your emotions out of control, but they don't really check theirs well at all. And so they have tempers, they get short, they stonewall, they have all kinds of behaviors that in some ways can often end up being like manipulative, right? But I thought that's a pretty nice summary of what does it mean for someone to be a jerk, someone who just consistently breaks boundaries, doesn't care about your perspective, and doesn't manage themselves or their emotions very well. Do you want to be stuck with a person like that for your life? No. I would say most of us don't. Not that sometimes we don't have people that we want to encourage along the way. I mean, we still should show love to jerks, but better not to marry one if you can avoid it. I got several people checking in and several good comments. Good to have everybody here. All right, so let's keep moving along here. So this is an important point related to what we're doing tonight. Your desire or tendency to form strong bonds can betray you if you do not pace your relationship well, especially if you find yourself to be the type who kind of immediately just kind of goes head over heels for people and tries to bond super quickly and move as fast as you can. That can end up really coming back to bite you if you don't take your time in your serious, at least your romantic relationships. We all got different types of relationships and friendships, but especially if you think it's going to be something romantic, it is worth kind of taking your time and pacing things out. And so we're going to kind of flesh out some of what Van Epp says in his book about best ways to do that. The thing that's kind of got this guy on the map is what he calls his relationship attachment model, the RAM model. These things look kind of like graphic equalizers on a stereo, if you know what those are. And so you got these 5 things. We're going to be talking about all 5 of these tonight just briefly, but to know someone, to trust someone, to rely on someone, to make a commitment to someone. That's talking more like a marital commitment. And then also touch, which is having to do more with sexual touch. In explaining these, what he does is he say you should always start on the left side of this. So if you're not in a relationship and you're going to be possibly getting in a relationship, you want to start in that left column. And as you progress, you never want to turn the dial up further on the right column than what you've already turned it up in the left column, if that makes sense. So you really want to, I'll go back to this image, you really want to know someone pretty well before you start to trust them a little bit. And you got to know them super well and trust them quite a bit before you begin to rely on them in your life. So there's kind of a progression of things. I've found it. It was really interesting to me because this is not a faith-based book per se, but a whole lot of the points he ends up making by referencing sociological studies, governmental studies. Like he's just kind of using raw data, and he ends up making the case for what most of us would call like biblical relationship type ethics. So it's an interesting way to make a lot of the points we would want to make anyway based on scripture, just using the data about how things work out in life if people do progress in this way. So the balance determines both the healthiness of the relationship and the clarity of your perspective on your partner. So in other words, you get these things way out of whack, you go way too far over in those right-handed columns in what you're doing before you've really established the left-handed columns. And it can either set things up in a negative way, but it can definitely mess with your clarity of perspective. So if you take things a little slower, you can be a little clearer, you can be paying attention. If you just jump into it too quick and move too quick, then all of a sudden you're already so in it that it's really hard to pull back and be objective about anything. If you jump too quickly to the further categories, you'll overlook crucial characteristics of the other person that should be explored and understood. Again, this is the biggest decision you make in your life if you're choosing to be married. You really gotta think about this person you're going to connect yourself to and make sure you understand what you're getting into. So I'm going to walk through these 5 things. So the first one is to know a person. Knowing a person comes from a couple of things. It comes from communication between you and that person and time spent with them. Interesting. Yeah, Ron, don't take it too far with the graphic equalizer stuff, but it does look like one. But you start with the left-hand column, which is, again, first to know someone. And there's those 2 aspects. There's the communication aspect, and then there's time spent. And I want to make this point that when it comes to a serious relationship, there is no substitute for face-to-face time with that person without distractions. Even if you exchange much information about yourselves, you must spend time with and around them in many settings to actually know them, who they are, and what they're like. I would say it's analogous to claiming that because you've got like a baseball card, like people still collect those. If you've got a baseball card for like a really good player, it'd be like deceiving yourself to thinking that because you know all the information on the card, you therefore know the player himself or herself, right? none of us would say that's the case. We would say, yeah, it's neat that you got some statistics, but you actually have to be around them to spend time with them, to go through things with them, to truly think of them as a friend or someone that you know. So think about, like, for younger people today, all the different forums for social media. There's a lot of different ones. But what do most of us do in our social media? If we're refined at all, we try to at least put our best foot forward. You try not to be a source of too much negativity on your friends', feeds. And you ideally would post stuff that you find enlightening or humorous, or maybe something about you and your family. But most of the pictures we put, like you're going to put, in my case, I'm going to put the picture of my baby when he's smiling, not when he's having a rough day, right? So you're going to kind of put your best foot forward. And you could learn a lot about the components of a person's life just by watching their social media, which is kind of what happens. It's the case now that younger people might, in some ways, know way more stuff about the people they know way quicker than it was ever possible to before. But at the same time, if you don't actually have the quality time with that person, watching them go through life, being with them at restaurants, at church, all the different settings, at family gatherings, like seeing who they are in all those settings is such a huge part of getting to know them. So again, knowing, it involves communication, but it also needs to involve quality time. And I would say there is no need to share too much too soon. You can either be too closed off, but you can also be too open and share too much. But knowing a person is foundational to all other aspects of building your relationship. So getting to know them. And in fact, later in marriage, when I talk to couples who are having struggles, I think at some point I'll start talking about the love maps that the Gottman Institute recommends. But I've shared this before in a sermon. But like, if you're really at odds with your spouse and things are rocky, the best thing you can do is spend a lot of time talking face to face and getting to know each other again. Tell me who are your closest friends right now, and what is the thing that weighs on you most, and what's the thing you're most excited about, and how did you really feel about this? But knowing someone well is at the root of everything else, and if you don't know them well, it's very hard to be healthy in your relationship in any other aspects. Again, next week I'm going to be talking about patterns that matter, things you should know about a person as your relationship grows. So would love to invite you back next week to join us for that. And if you know anyone who would benefit from that conversation, how do you really analyze a person? What are the good things to be looking for, paying attention to? You can always find us Wednesdays, 7 o'clock on both our Facebook channel at the King's Crossing Church of Christ, as well as on our YouTube channel of the same name. So we're live in both of those places. Would love to have you like our page, follow our page, subscribe to our YouTube. We would encourage you to do that. So knowing is the first step. The second would be trusting. Trust is a willingness to be vulnerable at its core. And I've got a few comments. Yeah, this is true. Will's a good buddy of mine from college. Good to see you, Will. I've found that books with data, if we are honest, usually confirm biblical truth. Will, I've said for a long time, you can pretty much work your way through the self-help section of a bookstore, and every book will either have tons of scripture quotes in it or paraphrase the ideas found in scripture. But when it comes to a source for the best life, you just don't do better than your Bible for that. Yes, Kevin, shared experiences are invaluable for getting to know someone. And they really add meaning to our lives, don't they? Thinking about the people who are your closest friends, it's usually the ones you can say, hey, we went and did this thing together, or we survived this experience together, or somehow we made it through this hard time together. Yeah, you learn all the positive things, and the negatives don't generally show up on social media sites. Randall, we don't even put real pictures of ourselves anymore. You take a selfie, but we have all these filters to kind of, clean our skin up, or we put dog ears or whatever we're doing. But yeah, it's just like a magazine. When you see a magazine, whatever you're seeing on the cover isn't actually a real person. It started off as a picture of a person that's been made into some version that they want to present of that person. Absolutely in play with social media. Yeah, Robert, that can be hard. I know a bunch of people in only one area of my life. It is harder to know people in multiple areas. Yeah, it's a challenge. And when you get married, that gets even harder too, because there's who do you blend with? How much do you blend? How do you balance the time? So yeah, those are a lot of Those are a lot of challenges. That's a real picture of Cheryl. Thank you, Randall. Good, good, good. Okay, so trust. This is the second one. Trust is a willingness to be vulnerable. If I will let you know something about myself that could potentially hurt me if you chose to misuse it, that says that I trust you at least a little bit. And that, there's obviously varying levels of that, right? Like there's some really, really big stuff that you'd have to trust a person a lot before you would share. But that's kind of the starting point of moving past, well, that's someone I know, to, hey, because I know that person well enough to know they're kind of smart about these kinds of things, or they've been through this kind of thing. Maybe I will trust them enough to open up this part of myself to them and just see how they respond to it, or maybe they have some good advice or encouragement. Trust is a willingness to be vulnerable. Trust should be based on what you've come to know about the person, again, through time spent together and information shared in conversation. So because of the details of what I know about them and because of my time around them, and I know the kind of person that they are, based on my knowledge of them, I feel like I can begin to trust them with some things. Note, and think about this, we're only on item number 2 out of 5, but trusting another person marks the end of your personal objectivity. So at the point that you start to trust someone, you are no longer neutral. You are already exhibiting some sort of bias, right? There is something you like about this person, ideally, if you're trusting them, but at this point, you're not objective anymore. Once you've started to trust someone, you think enough of them to trust them. Trust becomes a lens that positively alters your view of a partner. Now, it's necessary to trust someone if you're going to move on to deeper places, but be aware that once you've started to trust them, it may start blocking what would be otherwise shortcomings you would notice, and you might be highlighting their strengths. So we talk about looking at someone through, rose-colored glasses, like you start to see them a certain way, and maybe that way is in touch with the reality, but not always, not always. In a relationship, you always bring preconceived ideas with you. You don't ever approach a relationship as a blank slate. Remember, we talked about how when you marry Jethro, you get the Clampetts. You got ideas and preconceptions that you bring with you. There are 3 of these that I'll mention. One is stereotypes. How is this person similar to your fixed and conventional opinions? So maybe it's how they dress. Maybe it's the first couple of responses they gave you to your questions. Maybe you got some stereotype in your head of, oh, this is that kind of a person. And I know these days stereotypes have been misused lots of ways over the years, but let's face it, we all do rely on some stereotypes to process the world. You just can't spend the time with every person you meet to get to know them, psychoanalyze them. Sometimes we just kind of run with, okay, here's the person in this role at this restaurant. I'm going to kind of run with it, assuming this, right? So you have stereotypes. You have associations. How does this person remind you of someone else? There was someone, I believe it was Bruce McClarty. He was president up till just recently at Harding. I think it was him who shared this story where there was someone this lady he could just tell disliked him. He's telling a story about his sister. He said there was this person that just really disliked his sister. And finally, she just went and met with the person. It's like, I am so sorry. I don't feel like we even spent time together. I don't know what I did that was so wrong, but would you tell me so I can apologize? And basically, it's just a matter of his sister reminded this person of someone else that they strongly disliked, and they're just projecting that onto her. She didn't do anything wrong, but they've decided not to like her because of an association. So how does this person remind you of someone else? Now, that can also be a positive thing, right? There's things we really love that we associate people with. The third one would be ideals. I really hope if you're thinking of committing your life to a person, you have sat down and tried to think about and pray about fervently. What God are the ideals that I should not compromise? What is it that's going to be so central to my life that I won't back away from it? What are the standards I'm going to uphold? Those are very important. Oh, yeah. So Kevin's sharing some stories about misreading Linnea, and big contest to figure out who the snob was in that circumstance. Kevin is outing himself. That's very humble of you, Kevin. Yeah. I knew I could trust Jody when she said, "What makes you think you're such a good catch?" And I knew she was right. Yeah, so, you have those moments where you get some clarity on the other person, don't you? But these 3 things are important. Your stereotypes, your associations, your ideals. You're going to bring those with you. You don't have the option of not bringing those with you. So what you do is, having come to know someone, if you're going to consider trusting them more deeply, try experimenting based on those stereotypes, associations, and ideals, and say, hey, I would assume that a person kind of like this would respond to this situation kind of like this. So you get with that person. Remember, we're spending some time together. You get with that person and you see them in that circumstance and say, did they do what I expected them to do, or did they do something different? And then you go home, you take some notes, and you update your understanding of them. So again, use your stereotypes, associations, ideals. Just own the fact that you have them, but test them. How does this person align with what you assumed you were getting into? And be honest about it. Be brutally honest about it with yourself. Do they match or differ from your expectations? That's one way you can bring that stuff with you and kind of grow as you go. Your strong tendency will be to fill in with your own thoughts the areas that are unknown to you. There's all kinds of stuff about another person that you just don't know. This is funny. Thank you, Kevin. In the words of Mark Adams, I make mistakes to make myself more relatable. I don't even remember saying that, but I think that's funny. But it sounds like something I would say. Yeah, that's right, Linda. As a quiet person, I am sure you have had the experience before of someone perhaps misreading you just because you might not have been verbalizing anything yet. And that's how it goes. I've known lots of people who have been mistaken for snobs that are just quiet, not trying to be snobby, just shy or insecure or whatever. So we all struggle with different things. But the tendency is to fill in with your thoughts what you don't know. So based on your stereotypes and preconceptions, well, I don't know this about them, so they're probably this and this and this. But no, that's why you experiment and say, well, I don't know this about them. Let's experiment and find out what they're really like. And then you have a much more accurate picture of who you're dealing with. So wait, don't get in a rush, watch, allow the person's actions to fill in those unknowns rather than your assumptions. Hard not to do that at least some of the time, but to the extent that you can practice that, that's a healthy way to start learning a little bit more about who you're dealing with. I would also say in some situations, it is fine to forgive a person, but not necessarily to trust a person. I think it's actually okay not to trust some people. I think that as Christians, we should try to love everyone in the sense of I don't wish bad on anyone, that I want everyone to have a committed relationship with Christ. I want for God's love to be growing in their hearts. But this is one example they use. Just imagine you went to the doctor. And the doctor says he's going to hold the door for you as you go out, and instead he lets the door slam on your ankle and you kind of trip and fall. And then he just apologizes profusely. And then the next time you go to the doctor, same thing happens. He says he's going to hold the door for you, but then you let him, he lets the door slam on your ankle. And again, he apologizes profusely. Now, the second time, you would probably say, well, I forgive you. But third time, if you come back to this doctor, you're not letting that doctor hold the door for you, right? So it's that way with people, too. If a person has disappointed you and has apologized, it's fine to forgive them. In many cases, you need to give them more chances and maybe come to trust them. But if you see a pattern emerging, you can care a lot about a person, but just because you care about someone doesn't mean you have to date them or marry them or any of that stuff. And it is totally fine sometimes to forgive, but also to say, trust is not going to work in this one. So something to think about. All right, third step is reliance. That's perfect. Thank you, Brenda. Yeah, I wish I would have thought of this. Charlie Brown with Lucy and the football. I hope we've all seen some of those specials where he says, you're going to jerk it out. You're going to jerk that football out. You're not going to let me kick it. No. I'm going to hold it for you this time. Every time. Right. So, Charlie Brown, trust issues. It's fine to forgive her, but he is trusting her when she has demonstrated she is not trustworthy. Third thing. So you want to really know a person, spend time with them, talk to them, see them in different places. And then you start to trust them. Okay, this is what that person's pretty good at. Here's some of their positive traits. Here's some of the negative traits I'm maybe going to be a little gentler around. You start getting a realistic picture of them, but you do get to where you can trust them and they're a person you can be vulnerable with. Reliance would be the next step. A healthy relationship is an ongoing effort of two people to meet each other's needs. I think that's a pretty good definition. What is a real relationship? That is two people, especially a committed relationship. If it's healthy, I'm making sure that you're okay and you've got what you need. You're doing the same thing for me. Both of us doing that for each other. Not a one-sided deal, but both of us doing that for each other. But there is always a temptation for one partner in a couple to develop a me first attitude. And of course, both of us can do that, really, right? I thought this was a good quote as well. Not until love requires sacrifice does it earn the right to be called love. Let that one soak in. Not until love requires sacrifice does it earn the right to be called love. Not until me loving you has required me at least to inconvenience myself in some way for your betterment. Not until that happens do I really know this is love. So once I'm willing to give something up, and again, it should be the case you're also willing to give things up for me. It's not fair if one person does that all the time, and it doesn't last if one person's doing that only. But life involves many changes. Changes often result in new needs and require new ways of meeting those needs. The fun part about a relationship is that your relationship isn't static, just like your life isn't static, and the world is always changing. And so we've got to keep regrouping. We've got to keep working at knowing each other, trusting each other, and as we rely on each other, figuring out how we're going to do this as we move forward. That's important. As your relationship progresses, talk through ways that you and your partner want to meet each other's needs in light of foreseeable changes and transitions. Sometimes changes come out of nowhere. Nobody saw last March coming, right? Like nobody saw what 2020 was going to be before it hit us. But there are many things that you can see, and especially if you're in a younger phase of life where you're thinking about committing to a relationship, you probably do have some idea, well, at this point, I'm graduating, or he's graduating, or she's graduating, or, I may have this promotion coming up, or I may get transferred over here. So if that happens, like, what does that mean for me and you? And that's important to talk through. And that starts in a lot of ways to reveal to you, your level of commitment to this person, how much they mean to you, and in what way do you share in each other's futures. When I'm talking to people who are, say, not married and trying to sort through their relationship issues, I pay really close attention to the way that they talk about their boyfriend, girlfriend, or I hear what they say, the boyfriend or girlfriend says about them. Like, do they talk about you as if you have a future together? Are we talking about things? I think Whitney shared this a few weeks ago, talking about William, how William was saying something about something 10 years or 15 years down the road. And for her, that was just such a peaceful thought that, wow, when he thinks of me, he's thinking long term. Is everyone still approaching this with a lot of brakes on, and I'm not sure we're going to move forward, I'm not sure I'm going to need you for anything else? Or is it already becoming the case that, yeah, I'm easily thinking 20 years down the road and what this might look like with both of us, and how can we make decisions for that? But even before you commit, if you're starting to rely on one another and to really go beyond trusting each other to starting to depend on each other for things that are helpful in meeting each other's needs, that's important. Commitment would be the next thing, especially talking about a marriage commitment. So you really know a person, you've come to trust that person, you started to deeply rely on that person for all the good that they bring about in your life and for how it fills you up to be able to be a source of good in their life. You decide that, yeah, you want to commit, that you want to make this thing formal and official forever. This is a good quote. Commitment is a persevering, unwavering devotion that even death itself cannot sway. A loyal determination to fulfill what one is promised, an ever-present we-ness that sustains a union through the years. I think that's a pretty good definition of what a real marriage vow, commitment, covenant looks like. Unwavering, even in the face of death. Again, getting back to Joy's comment that you don't know what a person's health is going to be, but death will take one of us eventually. But even in the face of it, even if it's just a scary thing that we make it through, a hardship doesn't have any effect on whether or not I'm committed to seeing this thing through. Whatever your life involves, count me in. The ups and the downs, count me in. I want to be part of all of it. So that becomes a pretty important dynamic as we've got listed here. I thought that was a good quote. Strong commitments, if they're made in a good, progressive, paced order, strong commitments can really be a wonderful thing in your life that do help you through hard times. But if, say, you make a strong commitment to a person before you even really know them, certainly before you knew you could trust them, they can cause you to compromise what you want in a relationship so that you don't lose what you've already got. We get these ideas in our head that it's like, once I've found a person who at least kind of wants to be with me, I'll probably never do any better. And so I just start kind of rationalizing things or creating reasons or ignoring reasons why I should be, a lot more cautious. You can start to, if you make a commitment to a person too soon, too early, you'll kind of look past stuff that you really shouldn't be looking past, and you don't see things accurately. Got some. No, Randall, I think the point is that marriage is supposed to be a covenant unto death. So I would say it's more having to do with like being able to face death together and not waver at the face of it. Certainly it's the case, scripturally speaking, that if your spouse dies, I mean, it's up to you what you want to do. But 1 Corinthians 7, Paul kind of says it's really cool if you can stay single and just focus on your relationship with God and how you serve as part of the church, but you're not doing anything wrong if you want to marry someone as long as it is a Christian. That's the only criteria. As long as it's in the Lord, you marry whoever you want to marry. So that's a good question. This is good. Thanks, Kevin. For your betterment means in order for the beloved to grow into what is truly good according to God's standards. You won't do any better than to find someone who is as committed as they can possibly be to helping you know God better, to helping you get to heaven, to praying for you, interceding with you, challenging you to go deeper in your faith. Boy, that's a great person to commit your life to. It's called settling. Well, I'll just settle for this instead of what I really want. A lot of songs over the years, sad songs that deal with that topic. I'm not the biggest Pearl Jam fan. There's a song called Better Man by Pearl Jam that's really kind of making that point about a person who's in this terrible relationship, but she lies and says she's in love with him because she can't find anything better, right? So it's a sad portrait. So we want to be careful about settling. So strong commitments can help you through the hard times, but don't commit too early. Like, don't get married before you've really taken some time to get to know the person, to trust them, to come to rely on them. The level of your commitment indicates the degree of responsibility you have to maintain that relationship. So at whatever point, you pull the trigger and you're in it and you get hitched, or, you've come to some sort of agreement you're going to date exclusively for a while, or whatever that is, the level of your commitment indicates how much it is your responsibility to maintain that relationship. And so you get married to someone and you've pledged that you're going to be one person with them, joined together by God. It really doesn't matter how much you like your hobbies or whatever else you think you need to do in your career. You already made a promise that this was going to come first. And so don't take those promises lightly, because your responsibility to maintaining that relationship should come before a lot of other things. An unconditional marriage commitment is the final step necessary to gain the security of belonging to your partner. Once it's on that sheet of paper, all that I have is also hers. All that she has is also mine. I belong to her. She belongs to me. That is a big step, but it's also an exciting step that makes things possible that just wouldn't have been otherwise. So what was interesting to me as I read this book, again, this is not a faith-based book, but I'm going to share some statistics with you about just the current nature of sexual activity in the lives of young adults. And he really makes a lot out of this, how sexual touch is so significant. And I would say, this is me talking more as a Christian. I just think you should wait till you're married to be involved sexually with people. I think Scripture teaches that, and I don't think it's because God is some sort of a stick in the mud who just wants you to not be happy or whatever we might claim. I don't know why that's backing up. Okay, good. But I don't think God's being a stick in the mud. I think God knows what's best for us, and there are some real negatives that come about from being sexually active jumping over to this far column before you've really gone through the other things leading up to it. So I want to make this point first and foremost. All sex is relational to the core of it. Even if what you've just said is, hey, I've got this person, we're attracted to each other, we found each other, we swipe right, we're going to get together, it's just recreational, right? We're just going to do this for fun. Even if that's what you're deciding that you're trying to do, you're still making a relational decision. Specifically, I'm going to try and repress anything within me that would desire a relationship with that person I'm about to engage with in this activity. So, recreational sex has gotten to be something that a lot of people just kind of put out there and act like it's normal and or healthy, but there is no sexuality that isn't relational. It's always relational. A lot more I could say about that. But the problem with arousal, the problem with going too far is that it really does disengage your mind. And in fact, the more arousal you experience, the less your mind is engaged. So you don't make your best decisions. Let's see. Randall, this is all good information. I hope people will feel quite free to share it wherever and with whomever they can connect with. But recreational sex is based on the false belief that sex can be a physical act with no emotional strings attached. It just can't. This is especially true for women. This is part of why you'll have a guy who will, get a girl, convince her to start sleeping with him, and he might not even really want to be that committed to her, and he just says, hey, we're just kind of doing this for fun. Like women especially, plus they've got so much at risk. There's the possibility of pregnancy. There's a lot more likelihood of them contracting diseases and such. So, and if one of you gets pregnant, it's going to be the female, right? So there's so much at stake for women in sexual activity that I'll just tell you, I've been in quite a few counseling situations where it becomes really clear that like he might have thought they were doing something recreational, but to her, especially if the relationship didn't work out long term, deeply damaging. And so, recreational sex is a demonic idea. I really would advise anyone against it. Sexual intimacy that exceeds the level of commitment causes an emotionally unsafe state in a relationship. Now, fortunately, sometimes it is the case, many times it is the case that the relationship progresses, the couple marries, and everything does develop well and healthy. But it is often the case, it is always the case, I should say, that sexuality, once you engage in it, is opening a door that wasn't open before, and it does change everything. So there's this scary period where maybe you're figuring out exactly what it means from here. But after you've engaged in that, it changes things. It just does. It's a deeply personal thing. And so I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, but for those of you who are not married, those of you who are kind of still on the dating scene or trying to decide what to do with your life, I'm going to share some statistics and information with you. And again, not trying to be all gloom and doom, but I think, again, if we love someone, we should be honest. So I'm trying to share what I think is truth about this topic. But research has found a very direct link between premarital sex and both higher divorce rates and higher occurrences of infidelity in future marriages. And so both of those things are statistically, there's direct links. And so being sexually active really does put you at risk for some other undesirable things. And something that's become very clear to me in recent times is the way that ethics in our culture have shifted. So in 1974, the percentage of couples who lived together before marriage was 10%. It was not that socially acceptable. Very few people did it. As of 2015, National Center for Health Statistics, they studied cohabitation among people between ages 18 and 44. 67% of those currently married in that study had cohabitated before marriage with one or more partners. And so, when we work with young people these days, it doesn't benefit us, I think, to act really shocked when we learn that perhaps they're living together before they're married. I know if you were raised in a different era, your sensibilities are especially bothered by that. But I have to tell you, these days, this is what people think of as normal. I don't think it's advisable. I don't think it's healthy. And we can pin it on whatever we want to pin it on. I mean, the TV show Friends had the worst, terrible sexual ethics, even with a bunch of endearing characters. There's all kinds of things we could point to in popular culture that have normalized being highly sexually active and living with a person that you care about before you think about marrying them. But this is a definite shift, and we as Christians have to talk to people and not immediately get shocked when we learn that this is the circumstance that they're in, because these days everyone thinks this is normal. At least many people think this is normal. In a survey from the early 2000s, 62% of young people believed that living with someone before marrying them is a good way to prevent eventual divorce. And so, what they're thinking is, we're going to take this on a test drive. We're going to go ahead and live together as if we're married and kind of see how it goes. And probably it's going to help us prepare for marriage. But in fact, all the research shows the opposite. Like what everyone's common assumption is these days, the opposite of that assumption is what's actually the case. So they did a national study, and of all the people that they looked at, 46% of those who lived together ended up marrying. So of all those who chose to cohabitate, fewer than half of those actually did get married. And of those who married, their likelihood for divorce was as high as the rate for that of second marriages. So you may have heard that statistic shown out before about people will say things like, well, half of all marriages end in divorce. That's actually not a good representation of the data. What happens is it's much fewer than half of all marriages that end up in divorce, but it is the case that if you've been divorced once, you're more likely than average to get divorced a second time or a third time. And so when they say half of all marriages end in divorce, it's a lot of the same group of people who is having multiple marriages and divorces. But what happens is once you've lived with someone, you actually move into that category of people who are much more likely as people who are in their second or third marriage to divorce again. So contrary to popular opinion, living together before marriage increases the likelihood of divorce. Some other data points. Those who lived with at least one partner before marriage experienced significantly lower satisfaction and romance in their marriage. And that's just a statistic that's shown up. Depression among cohabitation couples is 3 times the rate of that for married couples. There is just something about, even if it's scary on the front end, and even if it seems like such a big thing to jump into, and we don't have money and we don't know what we're doing and how are we going to make it through, it's going through that crucible together that bonds you in such a way that you actually come out stronger on the other side of it. If you're both really committed to making it work, like you can make it work. But when you go into your relationship, again, not thinking into the future, but always staying in that mode of, is this going to work or is this not going to work? Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? You end up, in fact, kind of pulling the rug out from under what would otherwise possibly be a much better commitment. So a very important thing to keep in mind. From that same study, 40% of those who lived together ended up having children. All right, eventually, if you're sleeping together, very likely at some point you could get pregnant. 75% of these children will see their parents split up before their 16th birthday. To put that in perspective, for children born to married parents, that statistic is only 34%. So those who lived together, had kids, and then married at some point, again, much more likely to divorce. But think about that number for the kids. What a difference it makes for children born in the context of people who are married, and especially ideally if we've tried to move through this progression, right? So we've talked about the importance of moving in this way of knowing someone. Because you know them well enough, you come to trust them. Eventually, you start to look to them to meet some of the needs in your life. And once you see this is a person who cares about me as much as I care about them, and it feels compatible, you can make that commitment, and at that point you can engage in just fully uniting yourselves, and that really is both for you and for your children the best way to go about your relationships if you want to see your relationship be something that does last for life. Now, again, I am not trying to be a Debbie Downer, because we've got all kinds of people at our church who have, we've got tons of people who have been through divorces, who've been through terrible circumstances. Young people make decisions. Sometimes we make bad choices. And sometimes maybe even innocently so. Again, common assumptions in our culture are the opposite of what's actually good for you these days in these regards. So I don't want to beat anyone up, but I just hope that for those of you who aren't yet across any of those lines, if I can persuade you to make good decisions, to move through carefully, thoughtfully, prayerfully, I think these are all some principles that help set you up for a good life. Certainly the case that if you've made some mistakes, you can have a great life, you can have a great marriage, you can raise wonderful children. God helps us, and thankfully God forgives us all the time. So whatever things might be weighing on your conscience, I know that the blood of Christ is sufficient to cover those, and that God helps us in our places of weakness through the Spirit that comes to live within us. So again, not trying to be a word of discouragement to anyone, but I think this is true stuff, and we don't do our young people any service by not talking about it and by not giving them reality, because the world is definitely pumping them through full of ideas about how this stuff works. 1 Thessalonians 4, for this is God's will, your sanctification, your growth in your Christian faith, that you abstain from sexual immorality, so that each of you knows how to control his own body in sanctification and honor, not with lustful desires like the Gentiles who don't know God. We need to conduct ourselves in our relationships as people who know God, that I know this person is a child of God, and I want to see their soul be with God and dwell with God. I want to see them strengthened through God's Spirit. Like we should approach our relationships as Christians first and foremost. So again, as way of review, just bringing back up this relationship attachment model. There's a couple of stories I could share. I'm a little over time, so I'm going to keep moving for tonight, but this thing really is pretty accurate. You always want to start in the left column and don't go further in a column to the right than you've already gone to the column that's to the left of it. So good advice, I think. All right, so if you found any of this content helpful, some tough talk tonight, I know, but if you found any of this helpful, would love for you to like this video. If you think appropriate, share it with anyone you think would benefit from it. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our Facebook fan page. Go to this URL here, rmd.at/KC Midweek. Sign up and you'll get a text from me about half an hour before class goes live if you want to make sure that you're not going to miss a class. Next week is also a good one for people who are thinking about getting into a relationship. So would encourage you to join us again if you can. And getting some good comments. And there's a lot of things that have become normal, and we just have to accept the world that we're living in. So I was preaching a few weeks ago talking about the way that, I remember I talked about canoeing the mountains, right? We talked about Lewis and Clark and how they got to the very top of the mountains and they brought these canoes. They thought they were going to ride down the hill, only to find these enormous mountains as far as their eyes could see. I think the sexual ethics in our country in some ways are one of those big mountains for us. Like, wow, culture has definitely departed from us in the way we think about what we do with our bodies sexually, how we think about marriage and commitments. And so, that's going to be an uphill struggle for us. But man, you don't do your kids any favors by not talking to them about this stuff, because everyone else is talking to them. So the people that you love, talk to. And even if they say they don't want to hear about it and you're making it awkward and mom, I don't want to do it. Hey, they'll hear you deep down. They are listening. So don't hesitate to do that. All right. Thank you guys all for your comments. I know that's not the easiest class we've worked through. So looking forward to continuing from week to week, looking at some healthy relationship tips and tools. I am going to close us out with a word of prayer for tonight. God, we are grateful for all the blessings that you give us. We are especially thankful for the people that you place in our lives. We get so much meaning and value from our relationships. And Lord, if it is your will for us, for those who are watching or listening this evening, who are seeking that person, we do pray that you give them wisdom, that you give them patience, and that you also guide them to the person that you know is a good fit for them. Bless all of us, Lord, in our marriages, our relationships. Help us to honor those by investing in them, always striving to know each other better, and especially to help one another know you better. Thank you, Lord, for hearing our prayer, and we offer it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Y'all have a great evening, and we will see you soon.